This episode is brought to you by Fuli Gemstones. Welcome to If Jewels Could Talk. This is Carol Woolton, the voice of jewellery. Today we're continuing our New York series with an episode that was recorded in the amazing showroom of Verdura, high up on Fifth Avenue. Although, remember, we're in New York, you can hear the traffic. It's quite noisy, even though it's high up and luxurious and secluded. And I was interviewed by Landrigan and introduced by Nico, his son, the owners who own and run Verdura, about the book If Jewels Could Talk, the book of the podcast. And it's such a lovely conversation. Ward is so engaging, and I managed to get him to talk about some of his stories with Elizabeth Taylor. So listen in and enjoy, and thank you for listening.
My dad, Ward Landrigan, who you may know, within these walls doesn't need too much introduction, but was invited to have an exhibition in Palermo, and the British Vogue decided to send only one person.
Actually, it was Tatler magazine at that point. I was yet to move on to British Vogue. I was on my way to British Vogue.
Tatler, by lucky happenstance, asked Carol to come, and that was the beginning of a quarter-century friendship.
Wow. Yeah.
And we're very lucky tonight because, as you know, Carol has her fame precedes her, but I do have a little list, if I may. I don't want to embarrass you. Jewelry historian, editor, and author, and jewelry editor at British Vogue for over 20 years. Tatler notwithstanding. She was the first jewelry editor of Tatler magazine and has contributed widely to the likes of the Financial Times, Vanity Fair, Vogue, Daily Telegraph, Airmail, Town and Country, American Vogue, and has written several books about jewelry, including The New Stone Age, Vogue, the Jewelry, Floral Jewels, and Dolce & Gabbana High Jewelry.
It's a lot.
Carol curates jewelry, this is the best part, Carol curates jewelry exhibitions and hosts If Jewels Could Talk, the podcast she launched.
On any of your podcast platforms if you want.
People in 149 countries listen to this. And it has reached #1 on Apple Podcast charts under fashion. So, welcome Carol, congratulations on your book. We're delighted to have you. And
Thank you so much for having
I'll
me.
step out of the way.
I'm glad you're here.
I'm very happy to be here.
And we'll have a book signing afterwards, and you're all welcome to take a book home. They're not being sold, they're being given. So.
And how about that for a book launch where you don't have to buy a book?
Yeah, that's different. Anyway, so yes, actually, it's funny that just a little lead into this Palermo show when we met. Actually, Nico was with us. He was, I believe, you were 10 at the time, and your sister was there. It was an amazing event. We were invited by the mayor of Palermo, but the call came to me on a Saturday morning. I don't know, maybe 8 o'clock, a little early for a Saturday morning. And this gruff Italian, heavily Italian accented voice, I'm the mayor of Palermo. I can't do the accent. I'm thinking, mayor of Palermo. And I knew it was a friend of mine having fun at my expense. So I'm going, come on, who is it? And turns out it was the mayor of Palermo. We figured that out. And then he said, we'd like to do a show in Verdura's home, which is called Villa Niscemi, and it's owned by the government now, and it's one of the really interesting palazzos still, in extent and been restored and all that, in the middle of a garden. Actually, it's kind of wonderful. And so I said, oh yeah, that'd be interesting, because he said, we'll pay expenses, and that rings true. And then I started thinking Palermo, because they were having a lot of problems with the mafia at that time. So about a week later, I had already let Lloyd's of London, who insures all jewelers, know that we were invited, and they said, no way, no way, you cannot show your jewelry in Palermo. So I called the mayor of Palermo back and told him. He said, who's your insurance company? I said, Lloyd's. He said, okay. That was the end of the conversation. About 2 hours later, I had a call saying there was no problem whatsoever. I don't know what transpired, but we had our insurance, which mattered a lot. Anyway, we had a really good time.
We had a good time. It was actually one of the more eccentric press trips I've ever been on, which was, we laughed a lot, didn't we?
Yeah.
I mean, there was 3 of us. There was Daisy Moore, the granddaughter of the great author Evelyn Moore, who was writing it up for the Daily Mail. There was me for Tatler, and there was someone from the New York Times. So we made a very odd trio. And we had to go and see all the sights of Palermo, didn't we?
We did. It was
and it was a great trip. Willem was showing me, it was amazing. And there's a wonderful story that Fulco himself was born. There's a wonderful marble hallway entrance, and there is it's a star on the centre of the marble, and the story is that he was born on this star. And of course, being an American journalist, the New York Times journalist was, I don't believe this, I'm going down to the record hall, I don't believe he was born in the middle of this star. Daisy Moore and I, on the other hand, being British, were like, we quite like that story, we're going to go with it.
I did.
And then we had the blonde PR girl who came from New York, who was obviously a big socialite, and she was kind of unhelpful, really. And then, on the eve of the exhibition, there is the most wonderful tiara that I don't know if any of you have seen, which was created for Betsy Whitney when she was going to be presented at the Court of St. James, when her husband was going to be ambassador to the UK. And it's this feathered headdress, which Ward will tell you more about. But it is spectacular, incredibly delicate. I'm amazed you let Hamish Bowles wear it to the Met Gala a couple of years ago. But anyway...
I can't believe he did.
Helpful PR picked it up just before the exhibition started and dropped it.
And it broke in half.
Oh, no.
I mean, it was a gold break, so we could fix it. But I mean, what a way to start a show. I mean, the star piece of the show is on the floor in 2 pieces. Welcome to Palermo.
But that's just sort of, well, I do actually mention that in the book because I cover feathered headdresses in all their forms. You know, 18th century aigrettes made with feathered plumes on diamond headdresses, that at the time these feathers cost more than an ounce of gold. They were so sought after, to the Native American Indian headdresses, to the feathered bits that Kate Moss wears in Vogue, and of course the Whitney tiara.
The Whitney tiara, yeah.
And tell us why Verdura designed it like that.
Well, he got the idea apparently from the Albert Memorial, we all know and love, in London. And if you walk around the outside of it, each corner represents part of the world. And the Americas is represented by a bare-breasted woman with a feathered headdress. Supposedly, you know, you see it in all the maps and everything. It was the old American symbol for America, anyway. But since well, at the time, Jock Whitney was the richest man in America. This was 1956, and he had helped Eisenhower get elected, so he was made ambassador to the Court of St. James. And for the occasion of the appointment of an ambassador, there's a ceremony with the Queen, and Betsy heard about it and decided that she was going to, because you knew all the English would have on tiaras. They rent them. They do. They rent them. You can rent a tiara on Bond Street. Anyway, so all these rented tiaras. There was Mrs. Whitney in her feathered headdress, and she told me, I got to know her towards the end of her life. She told me that the hairdresser, because you have to sew this thing into your hair, it has little holes in it, because it weighs like 3 pounds, and you sew it into the hair so it doesn't fall off. So the palace sent a hairdresser long before she was ready to have her hair done, but because the palace had sent the hairdresser, she went along with it. So when Ambassador Whitney came back from the embassy that night, she's sitting in the bathtub wearing her tiara. And it's one of the whole family is, it's one of the great family stories. Anyway, but we're here to talk about a book, and I read it actually twice. And
I read it twice.
There's a lot of material.
Most people who interview me have never read it.
There's a lot of material, and it's also fun because she takes 7 categories of the jewelry that all of us would have, whether it's rings or necklaces or brooches, and talks about them, but also from a historic point of view. Not belabored, not making you, like, oh my God, this is a history lesson. How these things came to be representative of a certain kind of thing at a certain time. And I learned a lot, and it was great fun. And it's your turn.
Well, basically, it was commissioned from the podcast, which Ward has starred on a couple of occasions. And I had to sort of come up with this idea because they like the kind of stories that I tell on the podcast. And so I sort of had this idea that, having been an editor at Vogue and written for American Vogue and styled for years, and always was sort of chasing the new and sort of saying this is the new season, this is all change, this is all different. And I suddenly thought, actually, nothing much is different. And actually, if you go back to the beginning, I think whatever time of the earth you're born into, whatever culture or civilization, we essentially wear the same things. And I thought if you're Tutankhamun and there are the beads across his chest that was when Howard Carter found the tomb. I mean, young people today at music festivals wear beads. They're not as grand or as old as Tutankhamun's, but they are the same, and they show really how we live. They shine a light on what matters to us and our beliefs, and I think they always have done. So I thought, actually, it's about 7 objects that tell this story, and I chose the bead, the hoop, the head ornament, the cuff, the brooch, and the ring. And I thought sort of that's pretty well encompassed it, and I've written their histories, and in that, really, I feel that it tells the kind of human history, really, because it shines a light on all cultural aspects of how we live, whether it's politics, art, fashion, religion, war, revolution, whatever we've done. I think Jordi's been there to tell the story, and certainly, having been a Vogue editor for so many years, I fought religiously with all the fashion editors because I felt that jewelry told the story of dress every bit as much as fashion. And in this book, I think it hopefully tells lots more stories.
It does. It opens windows that you can see. And I mean, we were talking earlier. You were an art history major. No.
No, I was journalism, fashion journalism.
Okay. Well, I was like a lot of people in their 60s was an art history major. And nobody talked about the jewelry, and it just fascinated me because it was considered important. I mean, apart from the fact that most of it was very expensive, but most of it had historic significance, and that's the other thing that comes out in the book. I think the fun things that what we talked about, the pearl and the dog and all that.
Oh yes, but also. I think Verdura, I do a whole chapter on cuffs, and I think that Verdura was very, very instrumental in the importance of cuffs because it was his relationship with Coco Chanel that instigated the Maltese cuff being created. And he really, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was very important in sort of the education of Chanel, understanding different cultures.
She was very, very bright, and she loved to learn. And they met at a cocktail, well, it was more than a cocktail, it was a 4-day party. A lot of cocktails in Venice, and it was hosted by Cowan and Linda Porter. And they had, one summer, they had rented the Palazzo Rizzonico, which is now it's one of the best museums, the building, amazing, right on the main canal. Anyway, they rented it and filled it with their friends for the summer, but they gave this amazing party. And they had met Verdura on their honeymoon. They went to Palermo. By the way, Palermo at the time, at the turn of the century, was a very important destination in terms of it was considered like the South of France, and the Tsar went there and the King went there, because it was glamorous. Anyway, Foucault, I don't know under what circumstances, met Cole and Linda Porter on their honeymoon, and then several years later they had this party in Venice, invited him. He met Chanel, and she liked men, and especially men with a title, and he was good looking, somewhat short. Anyway, she invited him to come to Paris, and like a lot of people of his age, he had nothing else to do, and he said sure. And she put him to work designing textiles because he could draw very well. But within 6 months, the two of them had started traveling around, and he was to the education thing. He was teaching her about the history of jewelry because he had grown up in a family with it, and she had jewelry from her former lovers, and he was taking it apart and putting the stones into modern jewelry, modern in that she could wear. She had invented the little black dress, but the jewelry that she had was either Victorian, which didn't work, or Art Deco, which also didn't work, because she wanted to have, she'd invented this cotton materials that were light and all that. Anyway, it's your turn.
So I think in their travels, the mosaics, Byzantine art was incredibly important, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
And I think from that, he created a Maltese cuff.
Yeah.
For her originally, wasn't it?
Yeah, for her.
It was for her originally.
Yeah, exactly. And she wore them all the time. I think almost every painting or drawing or whatever.
And there's one other story that I really love, actually, that involves Verdura, which was the Duchess of Windsor, because he designed a lot for her, didn't he?
Yeah.
And
he didn't like her. No, he didn't. He knew Edward. He knew Edward before this whole, the abdication. Apparently, they were on a boat that went from London to Johannesburg or something. It was, anyway, it sounds like it was an interesting event. But they knew each other previously, so when Wallace came along, Verdura, he was titled and all that, and he thought of her as whatever the word, arrivista, how do you say it? Anyway, so, well, you finish this.
She bought a brooch.
That's right.
Which flower was it?
Rose.
It was a rose, and she wore it a lot, and she wore it out at dinners, and obviously she went and she worked a lot with Cartier and Van Cleef, and went and discussed the sort of jewelry she'd like. So she became convinced that really she had designed this rose. And so at dinners, people would say, "I love your brooch." She said, "Yes, I designed it." And anyway, in time, she obviously wanted to upgrade and have another piece of jewel. And so she came back to Verdura and said, "Could I change this? I'd like to change it for another jewel." And he said, "We'd love to. We would change it, but I understand this is your design, so we can't change it."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So he called her out.
Yeah, she was apparently fun to catch up.
So I love that story. And then tell the Tyrone power, because I think that, I sort of think, I talk about in the book posy rings that were, great fashion in the 16th century when people would write little poems and they were mainly in French, which was the language then of sort of courtly love, and shows they were quite elite because the elite would have spoken French, and they had, charming poems. And there's one in the British Museum that says, "Wear this and think of me, M-E-E." And I feel that's the sentiment that most jewelry is given in, really, that it's think of me, when you've given it. And didn't Tyrone Power?
Yeah, when he was. I'm just curious, raise of hands. How many people who know who Tyrone Power was? Oh, that's a lot. Okay. I mean, yeah. Anyway, he was a famous actor, and they used to say he was better looking than any of his leading ladies. I mean, he was really handsome, and everybody loved him. Anyway, he got married, and he wanted to. This was 1941. He wanted to give his wife something special. And he came in and met with Verdura, and they came up with the idea of giving his heart gift wrapped. And that was the first of the wrapped hearts, which was famous, because Verdura made a ruby heart and then wrapped it and tied it in a bow.
And then they got divorced.
1 year later, she got to keep the brooch.
I don't know how you can divorce somebody who's so romantic and gives you that. I want to give her my heart wrapped.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
it sounds good.
But it is that sort of But I've been lucky enough to host Ward on my podcast a couple of times, and what people really, really love and respond to are the Elizabeth Taylor stories, talking about women who have an avaricious desire for jewels. And Ward, of course, is the person who sold Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton her most important pieces, the Green Pearl, the Krupp diamond, the Taylor Burton diamond. He is the man who stood at auction and bought these things for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first one we didn't know who was bidding on it, and
Which one was that?
That was the Krupp diamond.
Okay.
And a dealer came and
How big was the diamond?
Yes, how big?
it's 31 carats.
A tizzler for her.
It was, it was her favorite. It was her favorite jewel too. Anyway, I didn't know it was for her, but I had taken this staff, for our auction staff, out for a drink at the local bar, and someone came running in and said, "Did you hear? We just heard on the radio that Elizabeth Taylor bought the diamond because Vera Krupp was the Krupp Steel people." There was a whole backstory. It had been stolen from her and ended up in New York, and they started recutting it. I mean, it's a whole. Anyway, so the good news was Elizabeth owned it. So I'm saying, oh, that's wonderful. What wonderful publicity. And the fellow said, yeah, but she wants it right now. And I said, well, we'll get it to her. And they said, yeah, but she's in London, and you're the only one that has the insurance to. Anyway, so the next morning I had to go right away. I mean, like get on the plane with no luggage. And I did. And next morning, knocking on the door of their suite at the Dorchester Hotel, and I never met a movie star. And Richard, in his bathrobe, opens the door and says, looks at me, goes, "Where is it?" I said, "It's in my pocket." It was where it was. It was in my pocket. And he leaned over his shoulder, and goes, "Elizabeth!" And she comes roaring out of the bedroom. And she looked at it. She actually said, "Oh, expletive." I was, "Oh shit," is what she said. And she just looked at it, and she put it on her hand, and she said, "Look at my short, fat little fingers now." I'll never forget that. I kind of like this one. My short, fat little fingers now. Anyway, so that went on for days because they were filming Where Eagles Dare, the movie with Clint Eastwood. Anyway, so whatever went on these days, we went to Wales because Richard's brother gave them a party at a beer hall, and they sat Elizabeth in a chair in the middle of all this sawdust, plunked her in the middle, and these Welsh people. Everybody was very nice, but there was a lot of drinking going on. And she let everybody, all the women, try on the diamond, and I'm supposed to be responsible for it. It was fun. But then that was the first time, and then the second time, I was in Stadt.
So where did you take that, to Las Vegas?
No, that was the Pearl.
Okay. So when did you go to Stadt? What one was that?
That was the Cartier diamond, the 69 carat.
So she's going upgrading now, 69 carats. And then again, the same thing. You had to hop on a plane.
I had to stay there. I mean, it was fun. I mean, wow, this is cool. I'm with a movie star. And they were very nice. I mean, we had a really small dinner at night. She loved to play ping pong. And actually, my wife's here somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah.
There she is.
So Judith benefited from this trip.
During dinner, she was wearing a red Halston, and she looked great. I mean, she was great looking anyway. And she was a little on the heavy side. She'd already made Virginia Woolf, but she
had extra carrots she was carrying.
But she did. She just had. She had charisma. What was it?
So the red Halston dress, and you said you liked it.
Well, I admired it. I liked her. And she was very good dinner conversation. So after dinner, she always liked to play ping pong. And they had, in the basement of this chalet, there was a ping pong table. So after dinner, we're down, and then she made her entrance in a green dress. And I said, why did you change? You look so wonderful. She said, I had my maid wrap up the dress for your wife. My wife, this is back there, when Judith tried it on, the décolleté came below the navel. Two very different shapes of people. I wish we'd kept it. I think we didn't, but anyway.
And what were you drinking with Richard?
That was Las Vegas. That's another. There was a pearl called the Peregrina that belonged to the French crown. Not
Very
French crown,
historic.
Spanish crown. Anyway, it belonged to a lot of people. And I delivered at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they were staying at the bridal suite of Caesar's Palace, which looks like a tennis court with pink shag carpet. It's so big. You can't believe the size, but the carpet was this thick. And Elizabeth was there with her hangers on, and Richard again opens the door, says, "Hi, how are you? Here's the girl. What would you have to drink?" I said, "Well, I'll have what you're having." And he said, "We're having salty dogs." Oh boy. I said, "I don't know what a salty dog is." He said, "It's vodka and clam juice." At 1 in the morning. Anyway, so I had a few salty dogs. Anyway, Elizabeth, within less than 20 minutes, comes running over, and because the pearl hung on a little chain here, and she said, "Look, it's gone." And I looked down, there's only the chain, the pearl's gone. And it had been through, 400 years of history, and all the books.
Monarchs, all kinds
Everybody
of people.
had owned it, and she had it 20 minutes. We couldn't, so we're all down on our hands and knees, through this pink carpet. And I crawled past a white settee, and under it was one of her, she had Lhasa Apsos, and one of them was under the settee. And I look and I go, and the girl was going, oh no. So I reached under, and then I got, so I said, "Elizabeth, I think I know where the pearl is." And she got it, and it had little teeth marks in it, but it was Elizabeth dog teeth marks. And then that made it more valuable. It brought $11 million at auction. And they paid $33,500. Wow. She did very well on her jewelry. Anyway.
I mean, do you think there's any woman nowadays who could amass a collection like that? I mean, the way that happened, and that somebody publicly wanting to buy these things, it's not possible, is it, Ward?
No, well, I mean, she really was very rich. I mean, her first, she was 14 when she made National Velvet, and she always made rubies, and she just, that was her life. She was just an unusual woman.
Yeah. But I guess the fact that these unique things have now sort of raised so much in value, it wouldn't be possible for someone to collect them.
No, because the diamonds, they paid at $350,000 or about $305,000 for the ring, and it sold for $8.5 million. So I mean, there was a good appreciation in everything she bought. But they didn't buy for investments. She also had a big painting collection.
And what have you noticed most in your career in the change of the way people wear jewelry?
That's a really good question. Well, there was a period when people were wearing it, like the 90s, and then after that, things sort of got very plain. I mean, it's the way it is. And I think the thing I miss most, probably because Verdura made a lot of them, is brooches. Because there's something. Did any of you see the exhibition of Madeleine Albright's collection when it was here?
Read my pins.
Read my pins. And it was fascinating. And the only reason I knew about it is it turns out she had inherited Verdura jewelry from her in-laws, and she didn't know she was Jewish, it turns out. And the family's name was, I think it was Florsheim. And anyway, we had these records of her. She sent me pictures of the jewelry. I said, "Oh my God, that's jewelry from 1947 that was sold to the Florsheim family in Chicago." And it turns out they were her relatives. Anyway, but she had beautiful jewelry. I love the story she told me when she met Yasser Arafat. She wore her snake brooch. I mean, just things like that. Just
and she had a difficult negotiations, and the Russians allegedly were bugging the meetings, she'd wear a great big bug, to say, I know what you're up to. Anything was going too slowly, negotiation, a tortoise. So she carried these messages, didn't she?
Yeah, and it was, I mean, there were like 150 brooches in the exhibition. They weren't all very valuable, but she was a woman that collected brooches her whole life.
Well, it did start a bit of a trend, because, the late Queen Elizabeth always wore brooches, and it did start the press on what I call brooch watch. Literally every single brooch she wore, they had to attribute some meaning, some secret message, whether it was a political one and I remember when Donald Trump visited the UK, she appeared wearing a brooch that the Obamas had given her. So of course everyone went crazy. Obviously, she was actually, I think, she was very sort of polite, and she wore her brooches in a sort of thematic way. If you were in Australia, you wore the wattle. You were in Canada, you wear the maple leaf. So I think she was sort of paying homage to the US, saying, oh, this is a US brooch. But of course, everyone went crazy and it took it as a political statement.
She was good at that.
Do you think people buy as many brooches now?
Well, it's funny. The last 5 years, the red carpet, etc., they've been seeing men wearing them. We used to sort of half as a joke
Frank
wear them.
Everett over there always wears one.
Except not now.
I'm going to borrow one.
I love the look of it. I mean, it's really just a miniature piece of sculpture, and it doesn't have to be valuable. Like money valuable. There's a lot of, there's a lot of acreage on material that calls for a brooch. And you look around and see it. They're just really good looking things. Not because I own 300. Well, they were out of fashion for a few years, but we kept buying them anyway.
Yeah, but on TikTok, there's 100 million hits on hashtag bring back the brooch.
Yeah.
I think, it's amazing. So I kind of feel like they are going to come back, but I don't see that many people wearing them.
No, I think one of the problems is most of the brooches were designed at a time when they wore heavy materials, and it's gotten lighter and lighter and lighter. And we figured out ways to make it stay. It sounds corny, but cutting a 2-inch diameter circle out of a plastic milk bottle, and then working the holes out and you put it underneath the material. So then the brooch doesn't do this, so it stands right. But not everybody wants to cut up a milk carton to wear the brooch.
I think, I write in the brooches I cover in the book, I talk a lot about sort of political brooches, the suffragette movement, who basically campaigned to get the vote in England by wearing, they used the colours white, green, and violet for sort of to symbolise the movement, and it was a way to recognise each other, to see a fellow suffragette, and as a sort of like a badge of honour. And they also had Holloway brooches, so anyone who'd been force-fed in Holloway prison had a particular brooch that they would wear with a sort of like a portcullis. And I think there have been different moments in history, the anti-slavery movement, where people have worn particular brooches, and I think we've lost that art really of campaigning using jewellery.
Yeah.
And
the last one that was almost universal was the AIDS brooch, the little ribbon.
Yes.
They were around, and it brought awareness to a horrible situation, but it was useful.
Yeah.
That's when they give a message. The other thing I find is that I think it's hard for a man to choose unless he has specific knowledge of, she likes hippopotamus. Hippopotami? No, it's hippopotamuses. I don't know. Plural. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Unless the fellow knows what's going to look good on her, and not a lot of guys don't. They're good at spending money, but they don't understand the whole thing. And but it's still, I think when a guy actually gives a girl a brooch, or any jewel, it doesn't matter, there's a tremendous sentimental attachment to it. In the time that I've been in this business, which is 55 years, women didn't buy their own jewelry, or at least they didn't admit it. When I started, and then there was this transition period where the woman would give a hint of what she wanted, which was mean she'd come in and look around and leave a list of what she wanted. And then we'd have to pretend it's just little things that, you know, oh, I think she might like this. But I mean, it made it easier for him.
But do you think women have always worn it to show their identity? And do you think that has changed or not?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I think some do and some don't. I mean, sometimes it's just a pretty
Some it's just
splash of color, you know, sort of call attention. Yeah, I can't answer that question. I wish I could.
Well, I guess, you know, however many years you've done it, you still haven't got to the bottom of what women want. So it changes with each one.
Yeah,
Some are decorative,
nothing's
some...
more personal than a piece of jewelry. You know, and you, I mean, it's also, if it came to you by descendant from a grandmother or a relative, it means so much. And we see this when there's a robbery. Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a big diamond, there's a big emerald, and then there's this thing that was given to them by their grandmother. And that's the only thing that they're upset about. You know, the insurance company is going to pay for the other stuff, but you can't replace the so-called heirloom. And jewelry plays that role.
Yeah, it does. It tells your story long into the future.
Yeah.
Something that you've had in the family or that you've been given, and it will tell your story and go forward. And I say in the book, basically, it answers a sort of human need. It's not a kind of desire, it's just a need. And I think we're talking about beautiful jewels here tonight, but in many cases, it shows a light on different cultures, and it's not necessarily something elitist or expensive. It can be a shell, it can be a pin, it can be anything. It can be a pebble from the beach. It's just what we imbue in it and how we wear it.
Yeah, you make it important by liking it. I mean, it's like walking. I mean, we have mounted pebbles for people who find them on the beach, but you can imagine. I mean, there's one piece we have, actually, it's in our museum collection. The story may be apocryphal, but it's a quahog clamshell found on the beaches of the Hamptons. And it was in, I guess it was in the late 30s, early 40s. Apparently, one of the old elderly dowagers who was no longer had a husband was having a fling with her pool boy one summer, and he gave her a clamshell as, you know, just for like, here, what else is he giving her? And she took it to Verdura, and he mounted it. It's quite remarkable. I remember quahog is about that big. He has diamonds and sapphire seaweed coming up one side, and it's all fitted out in gold inside. It's a compound. And I had a call from the Coney Island Aquarium one day, and they said, "We have something here that has your name on it." What? Are you kidding me? It was my name. Anyway, so I said, "Tell me." And they said, "Well, it's a clamshell with sapphires and diamonds." I said, "I know what it is." And it was because we knew the drawing, but we'd never seen the piece. So I bought it. It's part of our exhibition. I know. No, I know. Like, but your wildest imagination cannot possibly encompass all the stuff that happens. I mean,
and the mysteries that go with jewelry, because there's so many mysteries. So anyway, so the book is about this kind of deep human need, and we're just so happy that there are people like Verdura and the Landrigans who keep on his legacy, who provide these things to fulfill that need. So
yeah, the thing is, I think we were talking again earlier, you know, people, the minute you say jewelry, they think of money. I mean, it's got to be valuable and it sparkles and all that, but there's so much. I mean, wonderful, even costume, and I only say even costume because I started out selling Trifari jewelry in New Jersey when I was 14. And well, I was saying, I mean, my friends' mothers, you know, these were women I knew from baking cookies and getting in trouble. They'd come in and try on a piece of Trifari, which is plastic. And I'm seeing them looking in the mirror, and you could see in her eyes and the way she was holding her body, it transformed her. She felt beautiful, or something. I don't know what it was, but I know it was positive. You know, an expensive piece would be $150. You know, and these were working people, so $150 then was a lot of money. But people bought them, and then
Yeah. And then they transform themselves, and it tells their story.
Yeah.
But Wood, I think we should probably go and have a drink now.
I think it's a really good
I think
idea.
it's good to have a drink.
And I think you'll enjoy the book. I really do.
Well, thank you. And I just want to thank the Landrigan very, very much for inviting me and hosting me and giving me this such a special evening.
Thank you for listening. For this and other episodes of the podcast, please go to our website, carolwoolton.com/podcasts. Do share it any way you can. We love to have a rating and a comment. And we've had some wonderful stats through from Spotify showing that you are sharing the podcast, which is so great. Thank you. And we're garnering more listeners every day around the world, which I'm thrilled about. And join me again in 2 weeks for the next Jeweled Nugget, again from New York, where I spoke with a modern designer who shares the same obsession as Louis XVI, weirdly. It's about locks. So join me then to find out more. Thank you for listening and wishing you a sparkling 2025. If Jewels Could Talk with Carol Woolton is produced by Natasha Cowan, music and editing by Tim Thornton, graphics by Scott Bentley, illustration by Jordi Labanda. You can find our sponsors at fullygemstones.com and me at carolwoolton.com.